Picture this. It's the end of World War I, and something truly incredible is sweeping across the Middle East. The massive Ottoman Empire is finally crumbling, and for the first time in centuries, nations that have been ruled by Istanbul are choosing their own leaders. There's jubilation, there are massive celebrations of independence. It's a completely new era. But fast forward a bit to May 14, 1948, and we see a starkly different picture in one very specific area. Instead of celebration, widespread riots break out. Armed forces are mobilizing. War literally erupts. And suddenly, the focal point of the entire world becomes a small strip of land in Palestine that had just proclaimed itself as the State of Israel. Now, for the Arab population living there, this was seen as a colonial intrusion that had to be eliminated. But if we look at this from the perspective of the Jewish people, this moment was the ultimate culmination of a seemingly impossible and honestly once highly controversial dream of self-determination. So, how did we get here? How did an idea that was once written off as impossible become an actual geopolitical reality? Well, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the historical origins of Zionism and trace the incredibly complex journey toward the creation of the State of Israel. To really grasp this history, we need a roadmap. So, here's our plan. We'll start with the historical roots of the Jewish diaspora. Next, we'll look at the spark of the nationalist movement under Theodor Herzl. From there, we're going to track the World War I diplomatic chess games, the incredibly volatile British Mandate, and finally, wrap up with that dramatic 1947 UN vote. Let's just dive right in.
Section 1. Historical Roots and Suffering, taking us from the Roman expulsion to life in Europe.
Okay, so following the Roman expulsion from Judea, a massive Jewish diaspora spread out all across Europe, and for centuries, they held on to this deep spiritual hope of one day returning to Jerusalem. But as Europe modernized, these communities found themselves trapped in two deeply flawed realities. Over in Western Europe, forced assimilation meant they basically had to abandon their traditions just to fit in, and even then, they faced subtle discrimination. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, it was an absolute nightmare. We're talking deadly discrimination, forced confinement in ghettos, and brutal massacres. For Eastern European Jews, the idea of moving back to the harsh, undeveloped lands of Palestine stopped being just a religious dream. It literally became a desperate necessity for survival.
And you can imagine, that kind of desperation pushes people to act. This led us to the 1880s, when hundreds of Eastern European Jews attempted a mass migration back to Palestine. But honestly, it was a total disaster. Driven by fear and extreme urgency, they just didn't have any real logistical planning. When they finally arrived in Ottoman-controlled territory, what did they find? Malaria outbreaks, widespread starvation, and immediate arrest by Turkish forces. The hope of returning to their ancestral homeland was pretty much instantly shattered by the harsh realities on the ground. For a moment, it really seemed like the dream was over before it even began.
That brings us to Section 2, Theodor Herzl and the birth of a nationalist movement.
Let's jump to 1891. A journalist named Theodor Herzl is working in France, covering events there, and he witnesses some intensely violent anti-Semitic attacks. And a light bulb goes off for him. He realizes that no matter how much Jewish people try to assimilate into European culture, they are forever going to be hated as minorities. His proposed solution? That birthed the modern definition of Zionism. Herzl argued that the Jewish people had to take control of their own destiny and politically establish a sovereign state. Now you have to understand, this was deeply controversial at the time. Even among Jewish traditionalists, many believed they should just wait for divine intervention. But Herzl? He believed his people literally could not afford to wait while facing existential threats all across Europe. But Herzl also knew that you can't just build a nation out of thin air. You need serious international backing. So let's look at his relentless diplomatic hustle. In 1897, he convenes the first Zionist Congress, getting thinkers from all over Europe on the same page. Then he hits the road. Step 1. He approaches Germany, hoping they'll influence the Ottomans. He even offers to help bail out the financially struggling Ottoman Empire in exchange for just a small strip of land in Palestine. The Ottomans? They refuse to give up a single inch. Step 2, he pivots to Russia. That fails too. Step 3, he approaches Britain. Now the British actually make an offer, but there's a huge catch. It wasn't Palestine. It was a territory in Uganda. Naturally, the Zionist movement rejected this. Their whole connection was to their ancestral homeland, not East Africa. Tragically, Herzl completely exhausted himself in this global chess game and passed away in 1904. He never lived to see his ultimate dream realized.
Moving on to Section 3. Diplomacy, the Balfour Declaration, and the World War I geopolitical chess game.
When World War I erupted in 1914, it completely fractured the Zionist movement. Think about it. Palestinian Jews were relying on the Ottoman Empire for their immediate safety, while European Zionists viewed the Ottomans as a massive obstacle and decided to back the British. Enter Chaim Weizmann. He was a European Jewish scientist who ardently supported the British war effort. He relentlessly lobbied the British Foreign Secretary, Lord Balfour. His main argument was simple. If Britain defeats the Ottomans, you should grant the Jewish people a homeland in Palestine. And, incredibly, it worked. By 1918, the British had defeated the Ottoman Empire, and they issued the famous Balfour Declaration, formally stating their favor for a national home for the Jewish people. For the Zionist movement, this was huge. Having the explicit, written backing of a global superpower was a monumental victory.
But as we'll see in Section 4, things didn't stay celebratory for long. Let's look at the British Mandate, broken promises, and rising tensions. After the war, the League of Nations gave Britain a mandate to actually govern Palestine. But British administrative decisions, like carving out Transjordan in 1921, felt like a massive betrayal to Zionists, and at the same time it stoked Arab nationalism. By 1939, all this tension built into an absolute catastrophe. Violence on the ground reached a boiling point, prompting Britain to completely halt Jewish immigration to Palestine. Now I want you to really consider the historical context here. 1939 is exactly when the Nazi Party took absolute control in Germany, openly declaring their ambition to exterminate the Jewish race globally. The British slammed the doors to Palestine shut at the exact precise moment European Jews faced total annihilation.
This terrifying convergence of events shows us exactly how desperation breeds radicalization. With the existential dread of the Holocaust looming and the doors to Palestine firmly closed, extreme factions began gaining immense traction. Figures like Vladimir Jabotinsky argued that the Jewish people could trust absolutely no one, not the British and certainly not the surrounding Arab populations. This mindset gave rise to militant groups, first the Haganah and later far more radical terror groups like the Irgun and Lehi. These factions actively began assassinating British officers they viewed as obstructing immigration, and they spread terror within Arab communities. Even prominent Jewish leaders like David Ben-Gurion strongly condemned these acts. Ben-Gurion pleaded with the international community to quickly establish a recognized Jewish state just to restore order and end the chaotic bloodshed.
Which brings us to the climax in Section 5, the UN resolution and the birth of Israel.
By this point, the situation on the ground had become utterly untenable. An exhausted British government basically threw their hands up and handed the entire fate of Palestine over to the newly formed United Nations. The UN proposed a partition plan, divide the land into Jewish, Arab, and internationally governed zones. The tension leading up to this UN vote was palpable. Everyone was holding their breath. Finally, on November 29, 1947, the international community cast their ballots. 33 nations voted yes, 13 voted no, 10 abstained. The resolution passed. The international community officially recognized the creation of the State of Israel. Theodor Herzl's seemingly impossible political vision, a sovereign Jewish state established to protect its people from global persecution, had finally materialized on the world stage.
And that brings us to the reality of the situation today. For the Jewish diaspora, the creation of Israel was the triumphant realization of an age-old dream. It was a desperate necessity for survival realized. Yet, as we noted at the very beginning of this explainer, the very moment Israel was proclaimed, the surrounding Arab nations, viewing it as a profound injustice, immediately declared war. So we have a nation born from a centuries-long dream, but it came at the cost of a deeply complex, tragically unresolved conflict. By understanding this structured history, the persecution, the delicate diplomacy, and the sheer desperation, we get a much clearer, more nuanced view of the modern Middle East. But it leaves us with an enduring and, frankly, a very provocative question. Given the heavy historical weight carried by both sides, how will this history continue to unfold in the generations to come? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Keep asking questions, keep seeking structure in the chaos, and keep learning. Catch you next time.